When I was 3 years old and living with my mom at the time, we bounced around a lot from house to house. We ended up moving into a house that was just a few blocks away from my dad. I just want to state that these are my very first memories. I don't remember anything before this house. That's how traumatic that it was for me. But I'll do my best to explain these experiences in an adult version because I was 3 at the time and still hadn't learned to talk very well. So we move in, and I don't remember anything out of the ordinary happening right away, but soon I would start seeing this red man or bad man or fireman. My mom told me that's always what I would call him, because I have very little memory of what I would call this thing. I vividly remember it wanting to hurt me. I don't know how I knew, but I knew that I wasn't safe every time I saw him. Sometimes he would chase me down the halls or come through the walls, and I would run to my mom trying to explain what was happening. My mom said that I would run up to her crying and shaking, saying that the bad man was trying to hurt me. This thing kept going on, and eventually something else started happening. Every time this red man would try and hurt me, this new entity would show up. I say entity because I couldn't tell its gender, and I don't remember it having a face, but it was like it was a glowing ball of light that would chase away the bad man every time he was around. This went on for months before I finally moved in with my dad. Because I was so scared constantly, I actually developed a stutter and my whole body would tremble. One day while living at my dad's, I was drawing and my mom asked if I could draw what I was seeing. I was drawing in a coloring book, and one page had an angel on it, and I started drawing circles around it because I couldn't actually see what it was. In my mind, it was just a big ball of white energy. I'm not Christian and don't believe in angels or demons, but I do believe in negative energies and positive ones that could maybe manifest into ghosts or spirits. So at this point, I had permanently moved in with my dad. I went to speech therapy for a long time to fix the stutter, and now, even to this day, my hands shake. Apparently, it's called trauma tremors. After moving in with my dad, my mom and brother, who had never seen anything weird like I did, just saw my reactions to it. Both started experiencing things. Not as bad as what had happened to me, but still creepy as hell. My mom would start to hear the piano play, and my uncle played the piano, so she thought that it was him playing it, until she walked over there and realized that no one was in the room. My brother would see shadows and lights turn off by themselves, but that's all that really happened to them. My mom eventually moved out of that house because too many things were going on and she really was getting creeped out. Me and her moved into a trailer, and the first night there, I was laying in bed with her, and I was apparently staring into the bathroom. I don't remember this, but my mom does. And she asked what I was staring at, and I said, "There's a man standing in the bathtub." And she then asked, "Is he a good man or a bad man?" I said, "A good man," and went to sleep right after. We later found out that the owner of the trailer before us was an old man who had died. Ever since then, I've never seen any paranormal things, but I can still sense if houses have good or negative energies. Believe this story or not, but it was very real to me and has permanently given me a tremor. When I was older, probably around 7, and could fluently speak, my family asked me if I remembered what had happened at the house. I guess they thought that I forgot or had made it up, and I told them the story in astounding detail, and it freaked everyone. Me and my mom occasionally talk about this from time to time because we still don't know what had happened. We just know it did, and that it was messed up. I live in the basement of my parents-in-law's house, and my wife never goes down to my room. I'm almost always in there alone. Since I've lived there, a few things have been happening that I dismissed as ventilation or something or other, such as my door slowly creeping open. Frankly, I wouldn't even have noticed something opening if it weren't for the green indicator light of something I have plugged into the wall outside my room. At night, if I have to leave my room, I exit and make an immediate left and dip into the bathroom. I can almost always sense an entity in the living area or bar area of the basement. This feeling is compounded when I exit the bathroom and my reflection appears on the wall of our sliding doors. Sometimes, I do not have a face in my reflection. I quickly re-enter my bedroom and shut and lock the door. Some nights there's a knocking from within my mattress that wakes me up, usually between 3 and 3:15 a.m. I have no way of dealing with this other than risking it and fleeing upstairs to my son's room. My son, 3, has autism and frequently says, "That's scary," over and over in the basement while looking toward the bathroom and living areas. The light switches that I have access to when leaving the room frequently cease to function right when I need them, or will flicker out almost violently as I'm on the staircase halfway up and out of the basement. I can hear rustling in the middle of the night sometimes as well, and I occasionally convince myself that it's just a mouse. Lately, this has graduated to the sound of footsteps in the ceiling in the middle of the night. Most recently, when I heard these footsteps, there was no one home but me, and I searched the house wielding a knife for an intruder to find no one home. I think that this entity is aware that I know it exists, and I interacted with it via the mirror once, and it contorted my face. I had a weird series of encounters as a child in my hometown that I have since moved back to, and I just chalked it up to sleep deprivation mixed with having a vivid imagination. This first one happened when I was really little. I'd say in 2004 maybe, 2003? I suck with dates. This was one of the first experiences that I had, and it's pretty fuzzy. All I really recall is being at the top of a flight of stairs and jumping down the whole thing, almost as if I could float down. I looked back on this one and I thought that maybe I had fallen down the stairs and just didn't remember. But in that case, I would have gotten a ton of scrapes and bruises because it was a big wooden staircase. Likely not related to the other experiences I had, but still, weird. There was some weird stuff in between these two, but I'd rather just get to the meat of it. Anyways, here's the biggest one that really bothers me. When I was in middle school, I was incredibly rebellious, and decided to try running away from home in the fall of 2014. I got up in the middle of the night, and just decided to walk straight down the road. Not sure what my plan was there. Anyways, I ended up following the highway until I ended up around Thunderbolt, east of where I lived, and was stupidly proud of myself for not chickening out, and that I'd stopped crying. Anywho, I wandered some more, hopped some fences amid my adrenaline high, and ended up in these dense, really trashy woods. I started thinking over things, and crying again. Then I heard what sounded like my mom calling out my name from up on the highway, and instinctively ran away from it. I remember looking up to the highway and just seeing a person go limp and fall off the side and under the overpass in my direction, then start running toward me on all fours like some kind of creature. It was super dark, and I couldn't make out any features at all, and I wasn't interested in getting closer. So I just ran like the damn wind until my legs were shaking and I sat down in the underbrush. I was resting for a bit and still shaking, and crying and all that. Then I heard my mom calling my name again. It sounded like it was the exact same volume, like it was from the same distance away. It almost sounded like a mosquito buzzing super quietly in my ear. I passed out for the night, and then found my way back home in the morning. I thankfully ended up getting home safely, and all I got was bars on my window, scolding from my mom, and a sandal to the head. Oh, and sleep paralysis just about every night of my life since. You have no reason to believe me, and you probably won't. I don't care. I just need to speak my truth, as it weighs on me sometimes. Since it happened in July, I told myself that I would take it to my grave out of fear. Fear of my significant other, family, and friends thinking that I'm crazy and ostracizing me. I have no history of mental illness, and I don't take meds, but I also just don't want to scare them. In July, around 10 to 12 a.m., I went to the kitchen with a blanket over me to grab a fork and a drink. I was carrying the drink in my right hand and the fork in my left as I struggled to keep the blanket wrapped around me. As I was heading back to the living room, I realized that the downstairs light and the ceiling light were on. I turned off the downstairs light with my left hand and looked to confirm that it was off. The ceiling lights were closer, so I continued on to turn the ceiling lights off behind me while looking down the stairs. The ceiling light flickered and burnt out, and I froze. A blue light appeared at the bottom of the stairs, and I cried, but it wasn't out of fear. I was already in a good mood, and it felt comforting. I stared, and tears continued to pour down my cheeks. In awe, I walked left past the corner and stood there and continued to cry. For 3 minutes I stood there like that, questioning what I had seen. It appeared instantly after the lights burnt out. Could it have always been there? Who knows? I doubted my sanity, and by the time I went back to look down the stairs, it was gone. As much as I try to forget, the emotional attachment to what happened always helps me remember. I had to make a decision that night. Carry on with my life, or keep asking questions that I didn't have the answers to and let it consume me and destroy me. I accepted that I may never know what it was, just that it is my truth, and I don't want to be afraid to share it. At the time when this happened, I was around 12 years old, living with my mom in a run-down apartment complex. The building we lived in was the smallest of the 3 in the complex, and it was shaped like an L, with our apartment being closest to the inside corner on the shorter side of the L. To our right was one other apartment with another single mother and her son, who was much younger than me. Below us was a family with 2 kids that I was friends with, and the apartment above us was empty. It wasn't the nicest area, so after dark we kept our windows and doors closed and locked. The reason I'm going into such detail is so that you can understand why I believe that this voice didn't come from anywhere other than in our apartment. We were up late one night. It was around 11 p.m., and my mom was looking at something on her computer. She and I would typically stay up late hanging out together, so this was completely usual behavior. The computer was tucked into one corner of our quote-unquote dining room, basically just a patch of linoleum off from the kitchen, and our living room was to our backs. We didn't have the TV on, nor did we have any other lights on other than the one in the dining room itself. I can't remember what we were looking at, but I do recall this sudden feeling that we were being watched. Many things that I attribute to unexplained paranormal activity happened while we were living here, so the feeling of being watched was incredibly uncomfortable, but not anything out of the ordinary. As I was beginning to shift in my seat to turn and look around, we both heard a sinister male voice say, "Meow." Conversation level, neither a whisper nor a yell, drawn out in an exaggerated, almost lilting tone, as if it were mocking us. I would say it took around 2 to 3 seconds for this voice to finish, and in that time I was able to feel every hair on my entire body stand on end. We immediately spun around, me nearly falling out of my chair to the floor, both of us nearly hyperventilating in absolute terror. My mom said something about, "If you aren't good, get the fuck out," or something to that effect. I'm honestly not sure how I slept that night, or any of the other nights we were there for, but we never heard anything like that again. When I was about 12, I'm now 23, I lived in a relatively large, run-down house. I don't know much about its history, but I do know that it was built in 1936, based off of a newspaper that my family found in one of the walls during a renovation. I believe it had about 17 separate rooms, a fact that I was obsessed with when I first moved in. I just liked counting things. These rooms included 2 basements. One was right near the garage with an old door that went down to a concrete cellar where you could access some of the ducts to the house. And there was one within the house that held the laundry room and a storage room. My bedroom and the bedroom adjacent to mine both had crawl spaces going into the walls, 2 of which I covered with dressers. The house often gave me a sense of unease because of the sounds that it made due to it being old, combined with the fact that we couldn't afford heating it all winter, so there were blankets and plastic wrap in all of the windows, constantly making it very dark. Being alone in it was just scary for some reason. I could never shake the feeling of something looking over my shoulder when I was there alone, especially causing me to act like a fool and yell out at nothing while home alone sometimes. Honestly, I'm not sure what caused that, but I'm sure that it had to do with the level of darkness within the house, due to there being no natural lighting and my tiny adolescent brain conjuring up demons just because the house had been settling or something of that sort. One day, I was heading downstairs to do the laundry, and after I was done switching everything over and grabbing the laundry basket, my attention got caught by a large tank of some sort on one of the outer walls of the laundry room. I'm not sure what it held. It wasn't a water heater, but it may have been some sort of reservoir back in the day. It was very, very dusty, since no one ever went near it or touched it at all. Covering the tank this time were dozens of handprints, small to large, and also ones with much longer fingers than a normal hand. I'm not sure if it was due to dragging down, or the hands were just like that. It sent me into fight or flight immediately. I sprinted up the stairs and stayed up there for the rest of the day. It really bothered me trying to think of what could have caused the unnatural-looking, long-fingered handprints. I scared myself a lot thinking about it. Recently, I moved into a new apartment, and in the garage there are a few black handprints that I don't remember being there when we moved in. This could just be because I never noticed them, but I swear they were never there, and one day recently, they had just appeared. It brought back my memory of my old house and the fingerprints in the dust, hence my post here. It makes me a little uneasy, but not much else can be done about it, I'm sure. This event has stayed with me through the years, and I thought I would share it to see what others outside of my perspective think. I'm not really sure, though I have had many more experiences to do with that house in the following years of my life. A year or so ago, when I was 19, I was home alone and my dogs were in the backyard. I was on spring break. My younger brother was at his high school. Both of my parents and my uncle that lives with us were working. It was like early afternoon, 12 p.m. when I woke up and went to make my breakfast and stuff. I was watching a YouTube video while eating my scrambled eggs. I don't remember what the video I was watching was about, but I finished eating and went to sit on the couch for like 10 minutes, and then I had the sudden urge to go to the bathroom. I stood up and took my phone with me and started watching another video, closed the door, started doing my business, and at the same time my phone was at max volume. Then, all of a sudden, clear as day, I heard a woman hum outside the door. It sounded like a lullaby. Once again, clear as day, I heard it. It lasted for like 5 to 7 seconds, and I was dumbfounded. I always believed in spirits, ghosts, etc., but I thought logically at first that it could have been the video I was watching. So I rewound it to make sure. But no, that hum did not come from my video. Then I thought it must have been my mom coming home from work early because she does that sometimes. So I called out to her. I stood up, didn't even finish doing my business, opened the door and called out again to my mom. with no answer. I sat back down. I replayed the video a couple more times and once again made sure that that sound did not come from any video or any noise on my phone. So I finished up, flushed, left the bathroom, and looked around the house, checking to see if my mom had arrived and just didn't hear me calling. But she wasn't home. I checked on my 3 dogs, and they were just laying there like nothing had happened. Then I called my mom on the phone and told her what had occurred. She also believes in spirits and said not to worry. I told my brother, and all he said was, "Bruh." Then I told my dad, who is also a believer of spirits, but he takes a more logical view. Like, he makes sure that nothing natural could have caused it, before telling me if the spirit comes back to tell them to go away and ask for the lottery number. I don't remember when this occurred, but I'm pretty sure I was still 19 when it happened. But one night, I was going to bed. Me and my brother share a room. He's been asleep for a while, and I think it was around 1 a.m. You know, that stage when you're about to fall into deep sleep, but you're still aware of your surroundings. Like you can hear things as if you were awake. So right before I fell into that deep sleep, once again clear as day, I heard the same woman's voice. It wasn't my mother's voice, but this time I heard the voice right next to my ear. It was whispering something to me, but I don't recall what it said. But it was perfectly clear, and it was right next to my ear. I instantly woke up and opened my eyes, but there was no one there. I stayed awake probably for another 30 minutes under my sheets before falling back to sleep. I told my brother and my parents the next day of what I had heard, and my mom said that she would see what she could do. Legit, that was the last time that I heard the spirit. So to this day, I'm trying to remember what the spirit whispered. But I just don't know. I don't know if I had sleep paralysis, but this happened almost a year ago. I was sleeping, and then all of a sudden I heard loud bangs. I don't know if it was gunshots or fireworks. I just know it caught me off guard. And then all of a sudden I felt something hit my spine. I couldn't move my legs or arms. I was sleeping on my right side facing my wall next to the window. I kept my eyes closed and I tried moving, fighting whatever was holding me down. Tried kicking. I didn't yell even though I was about to scream so that my parents could come. But then I started to feel my legs again and kept kicking until I had full control back. I kept my eyes closed and fell asleep. I woke up in the morning, wanting to check and make sure that I didn't catch a bullet. But that only happened to me once. My strange experiences started 4 years ago when I was in my room trying to sleep. It was 2 a.m. and I was bored out of my mind. I had a projector that showed me the time. Important. The anti-burglar alarm was on. My family was asleep. I sleep in a room next to the hallway door which leads to a living room. I heard the door open and the projector stopped working. It started working when I blinked. The day after that, it was around 2 a.m. again. I noticed something heavy sitting on me. It went away after a while. I had my head covered by my sheets, so I couldn't see what it was. Those days I saw shadow people out of the corner of my eyes. The worst one was when I was in the shower. I looked in front of me, and something pink just sped up in front of me in the air and vanished right into a wall. The happenings just went away after that, for a while. In the summer of 2017, I was sitting on my bed after lunch. I noticed the air around me felt thick and heavy, and I said, "Something bad will happen." It was August 17th, 2017. The day of the Barcelona terrorist attack. It was around 1500 hours when I said it. For some reason, those 2 hours until it happened felt like seconds. 2019. I'm back from my trip to Norway. I was taking a photo of a book that I had bought there when I saw a black orb while I was aiming at the book. I thought it was a sock. The ball vanished when I took the photo. A bit before going on my trip, I had been practicing soft combat with a few friends when part of the cardboard shovel I was hitting a friend with just vanished. No one else noticed. I had some more experiences with vanishing headphones and chargers, but nothing else. My most recent experience started a month ago, the day when high schools in Spain had to close because of the coronavirus. I was on my way home, and I had the bright idea of reading a prayer in a dark magic book that I own. A prayer against evil spirits. Bad idea. I own a few Solomonic books, and one of them warned against using black magic because the effect would be reversed. Since that day, strange things have happened to me. No shadow people, but what looks like shadow rabbits hopping into my walls. I see them out of the corner of my eye. I also saw a silver one. A huge crow vanishing into a tree. I mean huge, the size of a bike. A black iron bar floating near my window and then vanishing into a tree. I've also spotted what I think was a UFO. And they get weirder. 2 days ago, I was doing some work in my room and I saw a pair of shoes outside my window moving at a great speed. It was not my family. They were in the kitchen, quite far away. I checked again. No shoes. And just yesterday, my family heard me laughing in my room when I was working on something important and not laughing at all. I've been reading a book called Other Side Picnic about urban legends lately, so maybe it's affecting me? Another strange thing was the knocking on my window a few months ago. I heard it in my room and in the room where my parents sleep. It woke me up, but they didn't notice. It couldn't have been the wind. It was a calm day. It couldn't have been branches, as the trees are very far away. Since childhood, I've had my fair share of paranormal experiences, especially while sleeping. I've had one particular entity visit me in my dream for 1 year when I was in a different house. Never seen that entity again once I moved, even though I lived in the same area. Just a lot of weird stuff like this. But last night, I had the weirdest experience of my life. I was sleeping in bed with my wife, and I dreamt that my wife kissed me and went under the blanket. I woke up and sat on the bed with my lower body covered with a blanket. I checked on my wife, but she wasn't in the bed. That was so strange. So if my wife was not in the bed, then who kissed me? While I'm thinking about this, realizing that my wife was outside in the living room, something started moving under the covers. It was like a snake or a tentacle that started wrapping around my legs. I kid you not, I was freaked out, and at the same time I was very calm because everything was smooth and non-aggressive. It felt like something were cuddling my legs. I slapped myself to make sure that I was awake, and I was, white as day. Holy smokes, I thought, this thing is moving and cuddling in the sheets, and it was bloody real. As the thing moved from my thighs to my shins, I literally saw the blankets move with it. Then I freaked out a little more, but not enough to stop it. I couldn't help myself, I was still curious. I kept sitting on my bed while the thing moved to my shin. I felt it wrap around both my legs and just stay in that position, like a ghost hug. I moved my foot up and down, just to check to see if this was anything like sleep paralysis, but it wasn't. My foot was fine. Everything was moving. I was moving. That thing was moving, and I was wide awake. But now it was getting really freaky, and I had to get out of it. I slowly pulled the blanket off, and whatever that was, I couldn't see. It slowly unwrapped and went away. I got up and went to my wife, told her the story, and we came back to bed. We woke up the next morning and here I am, still freaked out, hoping that it was an act of love by whatever, and nothing more. I actually laugh at this so much, but when it happens, I tend to just ignore it and be frightened. I'm agnostic, and I remember years ago that my friend used tarot cards for reading my future jobs. He said that I would work with kids, kindergarten, that I would work helping seniors, telecare, that I would work on a company that works with military fabrics, and at some point, at a church. When he said that, I laughed like, you have read it way wrongly, my buddy. Me, working at a church? I would burn before I put a single finger there. 2, maybe 3 years have passed, and I'm working not in a normal church, but in the 2 cathedrals of my city, which are famous all around my country. Everything was okay. My job partners are nice. I have a good salary, maybe some little paranormal behavior that we didn't really have to worry about. But due to COVID-19, one of the cathedrals has been closed temporarily. One of us goes there periodically to stay, watch, and wait for the vigilant guard. There are a lot of sounds, whispers, footsteps, light shapes, hard strikes around the place with no logic that scares me a lot. There are big doors that open and close. My boss told me that I had nothing to worry about because we were in a sacred place, so I tended to just ignore it. We also have a basement where the electrical installations are. We don't have to go down there, but sometimes we have. It has white and black tunnels. There are some rooms that were for wine barrels, but the whole of its interior space and the door looks like it was trapped in history. All of the little alcoves were also used for prisoners' cells, since at one point, the ruler of the Inquisition resided there. Everything always feels so heavy down there. The whispers are louder and more often. I always try to not think about it. I usually end up thinking that I'm just suggesting to myself that I'm hearing what I'm hearing, but after watch one day, on the cameras, oh my god. It wasn't really that scary to me, but talking about this to my friend and coworker that works as a guard, he showed me what the camera of the archive room was recording in that moment. Did you play Final Fantasy? If not, don't worry, just search how the souls look like on the game. There were a lot of almost the same kind of flames floating there in the empty and dark room. I was like, what the hell are those? Animas? Man, this isn't serious, bro. This must be a video trick or a filter. He responded with, those things don't hurt. But he suggested to me not to go into that room alone when the sun goes down, and if I have to, knock on the door and apologize for going inside. He said that they would disappear. Of course, he says that even if I go in, I wouldn't see them just through the camera, and that they don't always appear. The scariest thing was that one day I was in the bathroom and I heard someone come in and stand in front of my toilet door. I assumed it was the archivist because he likes that specific toilet, so I said, give me a minute and the toilet is yours, but I suggest you go for a walk. Haha. There was no reply, but someone took a breath very heavily, and a shadow was clearly under the door. George? I asked. Are you all right? Again, there was no reply, and the breath and shadow behind the door continued to stay there. Oh, I get it, Robert, always trying to prank me. How'd you get into the church? Oh, you came with the boss. I started to be scary because the reply was the same. I started to get really scared because the reply was the same, but there was someone clearly behind the door, deeply, heavily breathing. I just knew that whatever I wanted to do, like if he was a thief and I tried to call the police, he would break down the door easily, and down there in that bathroom, there was not really a signal anyway. If something was going to happen, the best thing was to record all of it on my phone. I asked again who was behind the door. No one replied. I took my keys and put them inside my fist, and after I opened the door, I found nobody. Needless to say, I never went back to those toilets. It sounds dumb, but the only thing I can think to do in those moments is to mock them or tell a joke. I can't say that it works, but it feels safe. And let's add that since then, everything in the place is on silent. I don't hear singing, I don't hear laughing, I don't hear whispers anymore. The house my grandparents owned when I was younger had a lady in the basement. At least, that's what I called her. My older sister called her the lady on the landing, because she only ever saw her on the landing to the basement. Either way, basement. I haven't correlated any of my personal stories with my cousins or siblings except my own. My aunt used to live down there, and I haven't dared to ask her about it because she had an experience when she was younger where she was physically lifted out of the bed by her ankles, and because of that, you can't even mention ghosts or paranormal stuff because she covers her ears and walks away. But that's another story for another day. Anyways, my personal stories. I'll try to keep them short and sweet. The first time I can recall seeing her, I was hanging out with my aunt, a different aunt than the one mentioned above. She and her son were in the house while my mom was working, and my grandparents were in Hawaii. Now, for some reason, she chose to bathe me in the basement bathroom, which was weird because there was another fully functional bathroom with a bathtub on the second floor of the house, as well as the shower in my grandparents' room. My cousin was expecting his friends to come over and play. The doorbell rang, so my aunt ran up to answer it, but had my cousin stay with me. I was about 3 or 4 at the time, he was about 9, just to keep an eye on me. She called him up to go play with his friends, and as soon as he left the bathroom and was halfway up the stairs, the door slammed shut and the lights turned off. Then, all of a sudden, I see this woman literally in the mirror facing me, but it looked like she was getting ready to walk out of it because she was getting closer. I, of course, start screaming. My cousin is on the other side of the door desperately trying to get in. My aunt comes flying down the stairs and couldn't get the door to open either. She kept telling me to unlock it, but I was stuck, frozen in terror. Finally, she gets the door open and sees nothing. She flips the switch on and gets me out of the tub, and nothing else was really said about it. Later that week, I was again with my aunt as my mother was working. I asked if I could sleep in Grandma's bed since they weren't there, and at the time, at my little size, that bed seemed humongous. She called them in Hawaii to ask for their permission, and they said it was fine. So I'm asleep in their bed, and I'm not exactly positive if it was a dream or an actual experience that had taken place. I was in the center of the bed. From there, you could see straight into their bathroom on the right side of the room, and then straight down the hallway into the computer room. Mind you, this is on the second floor now, not the basement. In this maybe dream, the bathroom light flipped on and I could see her again coming out of the mirror. It was like I was locked in place, but I could see down the hall in the computer room my mom sitting at my grandma's computer. I tried to call her, but it came out as a dull whisper. I tried over and over, but the sound just wouldn't come out. The woman actually made it out of the mirror this time, and got just a step out of the bathroom when I was able to get unlocked, and I ran down the hallway into the room where my mother was. Again, I don't think anything was ever actually said about this. Another time, maybe 2 years later, my mom and I were sleeping in the basement bedroom, and the closet doors were those full floor-to-ceiling mirrors. I saw her again, but my mom was within reach, and I woke her up and she saw this woman too, and grabbed me and ran upstairs. I guess a more adequate name for her would be the lady in the mirror, but I've been calling her the lady in the basement for what seems like forever. I know for a fact that the cousin from the first story saw her on a number of occasions. My sister saw her, my brother saw her, and a couple of other cousins when they would visit from out of state. It really only affected us kids. Over the past couple of years, I've asked my mother if she remembers it. My sister, my aunt that would watch me, and then her son and everyone is pretty much on the same page of this was real. My mother's theory is that she was a family member from the past that just stuck with the family, and she didn't mean to be scary, she just was, because we weren't used to seeing that sort of thing. I asked my grandpa about it last week over text if he recalls me ever saying anything to him about her, and he replied, "No, and I'd prefer it if you didn't." Now, here's the kicker. My grandma passed in December of 2018. I had not seen the lady in the basement since that particular house. They moved houses, hell, even moved states, and I never saw her in any of the other houses. Not once. But after my grandma died, I saw her in the house that I was living in that wasn't even close to the original house where I first saw her. Now I'm wondering if my mom's theory on her being a relative that passed and just was attached to us is even true, and that when my grandma passed, she followed her, but made her rounds to say bye? Because right after I saw her at my own house, I called my sister immediately and she freaked out because she had seen her at her house the day before. I haven't seen her since, and I pray I don't see her again. Half of me wants to write a letter to the new owners of that house from my childhood and ask them if they have seen her as well. This happened last night. I am currently car camping. I woke up last night for a whiz, and while I was doing my thing, I could see a floating, irregularly shaped light off to my left, about 2 meters, 6 feet, away. I didn't feel scared, more of a what is that kind of feeling. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this, so please bear with me. Its appearance was kind of like a parallelogram, except the short edges were jagged and ripped into 2 long appendages. It was kind of a milky white in color, with no light emanating from it. It floated in a straight line and came to a tree where it did 3 little hops and then disappeared around the tree. I finished my business, but didn't have my phone. I did have a flashlight, so thinking it was someone in the trees, I shone the beam through the trees, but nothing reflected back. I turn around to go back and get in the car, and the light thing is dancing around the back of my car, right beside me. I was able to walk up to it and try to touch it. I say try because my hand just touched the car. But the even weirder thing was that when I touched it, my hand created a shadow over the top of it. It was like it had no feeling at all, like just going through air. After it floated around the car, it disappeared around the side, and I lost sight of it altogether. I climbed back in the car for sleep, but was incredibly baffled, and prepped my phone just in case that thing floated through the window. This isn't my story, rather that of my parents and 2 incredibly close family friends. Before I was born, the 4 of them used to hang out a lot. They would often drive out far into the Mojave Desert to party and drink around a fire, just have a good time in general. So they drove way out into the desert to have their friendly ritual. It was summertime and incredibly hot. Even late into the night, it still wouldn't have been cold. My mom, Stacy, and her friend Gina started getting scared about tarantulas at one point. They decided that they didn't want to camp out there after all. That's when all 4 of them began driving back. It was around 2 a.m. They were on a dirt road that went on for miles with no sign of civilization anywhere along the way. Suddenly, up ahead in the headlights, they saw what appeared to be a man in a long black trench coat, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. The collar of his coat was pulled up. He was walking along the side of the road in the same direction that they were driving. My dad had grown up hitchhiking a lot, and used to pick up hitchhikers as well, so my mom knew that he would probably consider stopping and talking to this guy to see if he needed a ride. But then, they all got a terrible feeling about him. My mom always told me that the way he was walking, the way he looked and dressed, and how he was in the middle of nowhere. Him and the whole scenario were emitting this really messed up energy that came off as horrifying and evil. Gina felt the same way. My dad starts joking, "Hey, let's pick this guy up." And my mom and Gina immediately started screaming and crying, begging him not to. They were in the back seat. My dad was driving, and their other friend Brad was in the front passenger seat. Gina even started punching my dad in the back, yelling at him not to stop. I guess my dad slowed way down as they passed, and they all turned to look at him as they went by. However, the moment the nose of the car actually passed him, he was gone. It was as if he disappeared into thin air. It wasn't as if there were rocks or trees for him to hide behind either. The weirdest thing of all is that I grew up hearing this story from my parents, but living very far away from their friends. When I was very young, we moved up north and they lost touch, even though whenever we would come back to California to visit, we would always get together with them, and it would be as if nothing had changed. I moved back here to California as an adult, and I work for Gina now. One of our first conversations when I came back was about the Hat Man. She brought it up, not me. And she told me word for word the exact same story that my parents had always told me. To be honest, I've always secretly feared yet been simultaneously intrigued by this entity because of hearing this story. Of course, now I've seen so many others online to compare it to that I am more fascinated than ever. Two years ago, I took my wife, my father, and son, then 3, to visit family in New England. They live on a small farm with buildings that date back to the 1700s, which have been restored and modernized. There's a guest house which was built around 20 years ago. My cousin is a prolific photographer, and my auntie had decorated most of the rooms in the main house and guest house with her photos. We didn't notice much about the photos in the guest house when we first arrived, probably because we were all jet-lagged. The next morning, after a sound sleep, we were sitting in the main family room eating breakfast and making plans for the day, when I noticed that my son was keeping his head down and not answering my father when he spoke to him, which was unusual, because even at that age, they were very close. I looked over to my dad, and noticed that he was sitting in front of a photo of a room in a rundown house. The room had a large window with sunlight streaming in, casting shadows across the length of the room toward a dark corner. I got an uneasy feeling from the photo, but didn't think much more of it. We finished breakfast and all got up from the table, and I noticed that my son was walking in a wide arc around the end of the table where my father had been sitting. Again, weird behavior, but I just dismissed it as a weird 3-year-old thing. Over the next day or so, I noticed him becoming more and more uneasy any time we were at the dining table, and doing whatever he could to avoid looking at that photo. I decided to ask him what was wrong, and he answered me very matter-of-factly, "The bad man in the picture is looking at me. He's very cold, and he's not nice." I looked back at the picture, and instantly got chills down my spine. There was no man in the picture, but I got the feeling that there was more to it than an empty room. I decided to ask my cousin about the picture, and she told me that it was taken at an abandoned farm a bit further upstate. It was one of her favorite places, but had always given my aunt the creeps, so it was moved to the guest house. Over the next couple of days, whenever I would ask my son about it, he said things like, "The bad man is looking at me. He doesn't like me. He wants to hurt me." I didn't think much of it, until we were going to bed one night and my son tripped and fell, seemingly for no reason, in the middle of the hall, and started crying hysterically. When I asked him if he was okay, he told me, "The bad man hurt me on the leg." I checked his leg, and sure enough, on the side of his leg, there was a large bruise that looked as if he had been struck with a blunt object. I didn't want to play into his fears, but asked him how the bad man could hurt him if he was in the photo downstairs near the table. His answer was enough for me to pack up all of our stuff and move to the main house with my aunt, uncle, cousins, and big burly housekeeper right away. He said, "He's not down there. He comes up here when we go to bed." I never found out anything more about the farm where the photo is taken, but I'm sure that there was some kind of evil presence around it. This happened about 7 years ago, and still creeps me out. My husband and I were living in this little above-garage apartment that only had like 4 little rooms. It was built in the 1920s. There were a lot of strange occurrences in the apartment before this event, but I thought nothing of it. My husband was in college at the time working on his associate's degree. Neither of us was working. I had no cell service at this point, and my husband's phone was our only real working phone. I had a phone with no service on it except for an internet service called Magic Jack, so that I could call out when he was in class in case I needed help. If it went to voicemail, it would record everything. This is important to this story. One morning, he calls the Magic Jack line to check in on me. He heard the line pick up, then nothing but static. Next morning, my husband had woken me up before, as usual. It was a day off for him. He wakes me up in hysterics. Something had been captured on the line. He played it for me. There was a very clear growl, and then a voice saying what sounds like, "Leave." Very gravelly and angry. Up until this point, my husband didn't believe in the paranormal. He was made a believer that day. Have any of you had something like this happen to you before? How did it change your outlook on the unknown? I lost my dad a couple of years ago to ALS. It was a rough way to go. We were very close. I'm an only child and a daddy's girl. We always promised each other, whoever went first, that we would try to reach out from the other side. There have been many ways that he's been in touch. Some have been more subtle, like giving me the strong urge to hear a song that's not my usual genre, country, but while I was deeply grieving, I suddenly had to hear Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. I always thought that was just a breakup song, but when I played it on Spotify and listened to it, much different. The lyrics are about losing someone, but that we'll be walking hand in hand again in the land that knows no parting. In the afterlife, in other words. I knew as I heard it that it was a direct message. Also, he came to me in a dream. You know the difference between if it's just a vision or a dream, and this was the only actual visit. For about a year after he died, the standing lamp in my living room would come on its own every now and then. I would just say, "Hi, Dad." One night while I was taking the dog out before bed, it was a full moon in February of 2020 about midnight, I witnessed a small rock being kicked toward me out in the street in front of my house. There was no wind that night, and even if there were, wind doesn't blow rocks, much less uphill. He always rather liked to kick rocks if he passed them as we walked the dog, so it seems like a dad way to reach out. So I said, "Hi, Dad." I kept the rock. But the most recent things left me with some very sweet keepsakes. First, he left an orange heart in my robe pocket. I don't wear my robe outside the house anywhere. I have no idea how it got there, just a little paper cutout of a heart. Orange was his favorite color. He loved bright colors. I said, "I love you too, Daddy." I taped it to my bathroom mirror to remind me that he is still okay and that he still loves me. Then, about a month later, my hubby and I were cuddling one weekend morning, and we heard a loud bang from the garage downstairs. We didn't realize what it was until later in the day. I saw the back door had been slammed open somehow, and had been open all day long. I closed the door and mused about how odd that it was that it had opened with such force when it hadn't been windy, and that there were no vibrations or anything. The next day I go to do laundry. The machine is in the garage, and at my feet in front of the washing machine is a yellow felt heart with sheet music cut out in a heart shape glued to the front of it. My dad was a pianist, and music was everything to him. It was a little dirty. I can't imagine where he got it from, or what it had to blow through to get to my garage door. I think he opened the door the day before so that he could get that heart in there somehow. It was just above and beyond. I don't know how hard it is to do that kind of thing from the other side, but I just feel so very loved that he went to the trouble and found a way somehow. I taped that one to my mirror as well. Lastly, on my parents' anniversary this January, Mom woke up to a light on in the living room. It was the light on the wall that used to hang above Dad's recliner, an old-fashioned looking one with 2 separate bulbs. He loved that light. He had it on a little remote plug and everything. When he got ALS, I put it on a smart plug so that he could tell Alexa to turn it on for him, until talking became too difficult anyway. But it stopped working with Alexa right after he died, so Mom hasn't turned it on herself since then because she has back pain and can't be bending over to rotate the little switch that's on the cord. After a couple years off, suddenly it was on their anniversary. She left it on all day. After an entire year alone, mostly because of COVID, I think she especially needed that sign that he was still with her. It was the first physical sign that she's ever gotten from him. And it's proof that love never really dies. I was raised in a house that had a few spirits in it. My family are all skeptics and would always find a way to explain things. A few experiences, and then I'll get to the main story. 1. Our house had 3 stories, with technically 3 master bathrooms, 1 on each floor. The one on the main floor we used as an office. I would constantly hear someone walking around in the office at night, sinks turning on, toilets flushing, and occasionally taking. My parents would always say that someone was awake and making those noises, and the toilet and water running was just faulty pipes. 2. There would always be a shadow figure that would pace on the top floor. There was a balcony that overlooked the foyer, and I would usually see who I presumed was a lady in a dress, pacing back and forth. My parents just said that it was the shadow of someone outside. We were on a hill, overlooking all of our neighbors. I don't know how they thought this was possible. 3. I hated using the upstairs bathroom, which was my bathroom. I would hear talking and singing from that bathroom. When no one was home and I was in there, someone would bang on the door. One time I was showering and listening to music. I heard the banging sound so loud that it shook the room, and then the locked door swung open, and I heard a scream. My parents said that my brother was pranking me, which is something that he never did. Anyways, on to the main event. My brother is about 10 years older than me. He was the only sibling living at home with me and my parents. He had the master bedroom in the basement. I was never really in the basement except for going to the garage because it was in the basement next to the bedroom. I always remember feeling uneasy down there, though. But I wanted a big room, so when my brother moved out, I begged my parents to let me have his room, and eventually they caved. I moved all my stuff downstairs, painted and everything. I loved it. I was talking to my brother about it one day, and he told me, "Watch out for the little girl who lives down there. She likes to laugh." I was shocked, as obviously he had to be kidding. My whole family besides me never talked about stuff like that. I just kinda giggled and shrugged it off. He was probably just trying to scare me. About a week after I moved into my new room, I had a friend come over. We were just laying on the floor next to the bathroom laughing when she had to go to the bathroom. She closed the door and I was just zoning out, when all of a sudden she goes, "That's not funny." I asked her what she was talking about, as I hadn't done anything. She said that she heard someone laughing right outside the door, but I didn't do anything or hear anything. She left freaked out, and I assumed that my brother had put her up to it since she liked him. A few days later, I hear someone in my bedroom while I'm in the shower. I call out thinking it's my mom, but I don't hear a response. I get out, and as I'm putting on my robe, I hear a little girl's giggle, and then, "Are you looking for me?" I freak out. I throw open the door to my room, but no one is there. I checked the garage and ended up setting off the house alarm so no one could have come or gone through the doors without everyone knowing. I run upstairs, and my mom is pissed that I set off the alarm, and I tell her what just happened. She told me my brother had a similar story when we first moved in, but that it was nothing. I called my brother and asked him why he told me to watch out for the little girl. He said that I was the little girl. He was kidding because, quote unquote, you would always come downstairs and giggle really creepy. I never did anything like that. I told him that, and he got creeped out. I still would occasionally hear the little girl. I never saw her, but she did like to laugh and open the bathroom and closet doors. I named her Sarah. My brother called me up today and asked me about this. He asked me if I was sure that I never tried to scare him by laughing, and I told him no. He got really uncomfortable. I don't think he knows how to handle the fact that our house is haunted. My birthday was on April 14th and I had just turned 12, so there were multiple balloons on the floor where this happened. It was around 3:30 a.m. on Sunday, and my family was asleep, but I was playing with my new birthday present, a Nintendo Switch, in my bedroom. I heard a loud pop sound coming from the kitchen. It sounded like a balloon, but louder and sort of more aggressive, if that makes sense. I put down my Nintendo Switch and told the girl that I was playing with that I would be right back. I opened my bedroom door and headed to the living room to explore the cause of this noise. I saw a deflated balloon in the same spot where it was earlier. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a misty white apparition in the shape of a woman, maybe about 4 feet tall, seated on my dad's sheepskin chair. I felt extremely cold, and an inexplicable feeling washed over me. The best way I can describe it is an overwhelming feeling of dread. I really wanted to go back to the safety of my own room, so I turned around and went back inside. I was playing with my friend and it was around 4:15 a.m. when I heard another noise coming from the living room. It was the sort of sound that you hear when something falls on glass but doesn't break it. Being scared as hell, I decided not to explore, as the sun was rising and I was getting ready for online school, and I go to the living room and the second noise happened. I see a framed picture lying face down on the ground. The picture is of my grandma who died in 2009, holding me as a baby. I'm a corrections officer at County Jail in Northwest Alabama. I work a 12-hour night shift from 1800 to 0600, 6 p.m. through 6 a.m. Most nights are calm and not much happens from 2200 through 0500, 10 p.m. through 5 a.m. And other nights, you're moving non-stop and police officers are constantly bringing people in. You have a lot of DUIs and junkies on the weekends, and then anything from an FTA to the occasional murder throughout the regular work week. Anyways, like I said, most nights are calm, meaning that hours feel like days, and sometimes a single shift can make you feel like you've been here for weeks. But sometimes, those calm nights are not really all that calm. We have 2 holding cells in the front of the jail used to house inmates that have been recently booked in, and are waiting to see the nurse for screening before going to Gen Pop. We have another room up front that we call the Pink Room, due to the walls and ceiling being painted a hot pink color because a former sheriff thought hot pink was a calming color. Everyone hates this room. It's our drunk tank, equipped with a camera for observation and a flushable drain in the floor for any liquids that might come out of someone, if you know what I mean. One night after lights out, when everyone was asleep, I heard a loud bang in one of the holding cells, like someone was hitting or kicking the door, which would have been a normal noise if anyone would have been inside one of them. But my partner and I had moved everyone out of the 2 holding cells just a few hours ago, and no one else had come in that night. I thought it might have been the guy we were keeping in the pink room for medical observation, but when I looked over at the monitor for the camera in there, he was sound asleep on his mat on the floor. I went over to the doors of the holding cells to investigate. I lifted the heavy curtains on the windows so that I could see into each one, but there was no sign of anything. I figured I was just hearing stuff since that noise is so commonly heard at all times of the day or night. I went back over to my desk and sat down. It was about 02:45 when I heard that noise, and it was completely silent until about 03:05. I started hearing the noise it makes when a door is unlocked from the control room. From the control room, you can unlock or open any door in the facility except for like 3 that you need an actual key for. There's a door right behind the desk that I sit at that leads to the kitchen and rec yard. That was the door that sounded like it was unlocked. I radioed my partner, who was in the control room, and asked if she had unlocked this door. She said that she hadn't touched the computer since I asked her to let me outside to vape like 2 hours ago. Again, I thought it was a common noise to be heard, the silence is playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, except this time it sounded like the front door. I looked over at the monitors for the front door and saw nothing, but on the monitor for the pink room I could see the screen start to get fuzzy, like static. Then it was completely black for a few seconds. When the camera came back on, the inmate was sleeping in the exact same spot. But everything he had in there with him, his cup, shoes, blankets, was all scattered across the whole room. I would have heard him moving and throwing things, but it was completely quiet for those few seconds when the camera was black. After that, I decided I didn't want to be alone anymore. I went to sit with my partner and started telling her what was going on. After I told her about the doors unlocking and locking and about the guy's stuff in the pink room, she just laughed and said, "Must have been Christine." My partner has been working here for 5 years now. She told me that Christine was an inmate that had died in the old jail next door, and that the reason she haunts this jail is because the buildings are connected. She told me about numerous things that have happened while she was on shift, including actual sightings of the ghost she calls Christine. She said that Christine has gray hair down to her shoulders, and that she's wearing a nightgown. She also said that Christine can be seen walking down hallways on the cameras, inside the cells with her hands on the bars looking through them, and that sometimes you can see her face from the windows outside. This story took place when I was a kid. My dad has been a pool man for many years. One of his oldest customers decided to purchase a ranch. I don't exactly remember where. He asked my dad if he could come and fix their pool, which was disastrously maintained before he bought it. He gave my dad permission to bring us along, and told us we were welcome to stay a few days to enjoy the ranch. We drove there, and I had been in charge of reading the MapQuest instructions because I never seemed to be able to sleep during car trips. We drove back home a few days later after my dad was finally able to save the pool. The drive home was very long. For whole stretches, the view was mostly desert, farms, and the occasional suburban town. Unlike me, my mom and brothers knocked out almost immediately. So most of the trip, it was just my dad and I talking or listening to music. I'm also a very avid reader, so I had a book on my lap beside the maps. I remember the ride had been quiet for a while because I had been reading. I had to stop because it was getting dark, and my dad only let me turn on the dome lights to read the maps. No radio service, and the Game Boy's batteries had all died. All I had left to do was look outside. All of a sudden, I spotted a very tall shadow on a roof. I recognized that there was a man who seemed to be wearing a hat, bowler or top hat, dancing and jumping from roof to roof of this suburban lot. It was kind of like the scene from Singing in the Rain, which at that point I had not seen yet. It took a second to realize that it wasn't a normal thing to just happen. The houses were separated in a way where a normal person couldn't possibly have jumped roof to roof. What scared me the most is how at the last house before a field he seemed to turn around and sense me. He bowed and tipped his hat. Even though I couldn't see it, I could sense him smiling. All I felt was dread. I turned to face my dad to see if he had seen him as well, but he had been paying attention to the road. When I turned back, I couldn't see the houses anymore. They were way behind us. I never saw a face or any details. He was just a silhouette on the roofs. I remember feeling afraid that he might follow us, or that he could if he wanted to. I never saw something like that on our many road trips ever again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, but it felt so real. The memory is very vivid as well, which always comes back when I'm watching old musicals because the dancing reminds me of the way that he moved. This is a real story in this area. People actually report seeing this. It's a tale that comes from a little town in Lancaster County, a place called Elizabethtown. It's called the Purple Light Bridge, and it's a story that began in the early 1900s. Could be more than a tale, though, since there is proof of the purple light and the tragic incident behind it. So one of the tales is that a young boy is struck by a train on the bridge that intersects between Turnpike and Road Street, which is where the train station for Amtrak is. It supposedly happened in 1934, and some people claim that there is proof of the accident. So after the boy's death, it is said that late at night you can see a purple light on the bridge or in the gorge where the train track ran into from the north heading southwest. People like to argue that you can see the light at another location and that it's been there not only by the train station itself. They claim that you can see the lights under the bridge that is above the train tracks on Bossler Road. Bossler Road, for this purple light, had another tale. A mother brought her son to the bridge, and under that bridge, she hung her son, and then herself. Locals say that the purple light that you see is the mother and the son, as one energy. Some people have claimed that the purple light comes from the moonlight reflecting off of the rocks below. Yet even more people claim that it's actually the bridge a couple miles away in Newville near Elizabethtown. I have not yet tried to investigate, but certainly intend to. My father is a policeman. He's a no-nonsense guy who lives very much in the here and now and believes only in what he can see and feel or hear for himself. At the time of this story, he was in the police force for more than 20 years and I was a teenager. My father worked night shifts, and on a regular basis he would come home early in the morning to have breakfast with us. He would then go to bed, and we would go to school. He was usually in a good mood and would tell us funny or interesting stories from his day or night at work. At this particular morning, he was unusually silent, and he didn't eat either. My mother asked if he felt all right. It took him a while to actually answer, and he said, "I'm not sure what I experienced tonight." He didn't want to say any more in front of us kids, but we prodded him long enough until he told us the following. It had been a quiet night, and he was out with his colleague in a police car. At some point they were informed over the radio that a car chase was going on not far from them, and their assistance was required. They drove off toward the chase, and soon caught up with the suspect's vehicle. The radio had informed them that 2 men were in the front seat of the car. My father's car pulled up almost beside the car so that he managed to get a good look at the inside. He saw the 2 men in the front arguing heatedly with each other, and then he saw another man in the back. He had no hair and was so pale that he almost seemed white. He was dressed in all black. He looked directly at my father, his face almost pressed against the window with very dark eyes, and he grinned widely. My father was deeply unsettled by this person. He seemed to look directly into my father's eyes. My father was so sure of this third person that he informed the other police cars about him. The chase ended with the car crashing into a fence and the suspects fleeing into a field. They were apprehended only minutes later. There were 2 men, not 3. My father asked his colleagues at the scene if they were sure that there hadn't been a third guy. No one else had seen him. "I can't explain it," he said to us. "I saw him clear as day, and he grinned at me like death himself." This took place in 2004-2005 in Germany. To this day, we have no logical explanation for what he really saw and experienced. I'm married with 3 kids. The kids are older, 20, 17, and 10. We just bought a house and moved in the first week of December. Our room and my daughter's rooms are upstairs, and my 20-year-old son has a room in the basement. There's a storage room across from his room, then a big area with a fireplace where I have my gaming console, TV, and chair set up. Anyhow, on Christmas Day, the wife and kids were getting ready to go to her dad's house. I wasn't going because me and her dad didn't get along. I fire up the PlayStation in the basement and put on my headset. They're all upstairs running around because they're going to be late, and I see my son come downstairs and head into his room to grab something. A few minutes go by and I'm focusing on my game. Out of the corner of my eye, I see what I thought was my son leave his room and walk into the storage room, then slam the door hard and loud enough that I hear it through my noise-canceling headset. I pull off my headset and yell, "What the hell, man?" and look over at the storage room. The house is quiet. I walk over and open the storage room door. It's a 10 by 10 room with no windows and nothing in it. I look in his room, but he's not in there. I go upstairs, and they've already left. The van is gone. I told my wife about it, and she just laughed. Funny thing is, I never mentioned it to my son, but the other day I came home from work and he says, "Damn, Dad, I could hear you in the gaming room until like 4 a.m. I'm surprised you made it to work this morning." Me and all the girls had gone to bed by 9 p.m. the night before. Once a year, my parents go on a vacation together somewhere in the U.S., usually to the Bahamas or to Florida. They leave me in charge of the house with my dog and like for me to check on my Nana, who lives in our basement. My dad likes to take part in this weird golfing competition with his friends, where if someone wins a certain amount of holes, they get to take home this creepy doll as sort of a trophy. I don't get why, but I guess it's just some running gag. Well, my dad won the competition and he brought it home before he left. I'm not at all scared of dolls. In fact, before he left, I slept with it beside me as a joke. It was basically an old baby doll with a missing eye and a brown dress. I don't know the origin of it and didn't really bother to ask. November rolls around and my parents leave for their vacation. Everything goes normal for a while, but then things start to get weird. Because I'm the stereotypical little brother, I put the doll on my sister's bed, who's in university, and took a picture to send her as a joke. She hates dolls. So I leave the room with the doll still in there and head to my room just to send the photo and move on with my life. A few minutes later, I hear a massive bang. I jump, startled, and go to look out into the hallway. My sister's bedroom door has slammed shut. Now, our hallway has no opening windows, and there wasn't any sort of draft. Even if there was, that bang sounded forceful. A little on edge, I open her door and see that the doll has fallen face forward, even though I left it sitting upright. I thought it was weird, but brought the doll back into my room and moved on. That night, I'm sleeping normally in my parents' bedroom. I have to sleep in there while my parents are away because I need to keep an eye on my dog, and she refuses to sleep anywhere else. I wake up suddenly in the night, which is odd. I usually sleep all the way through the night. I check the time and see that it's around 3 a.m. This immediately scares me because I read that it's the witching hour. I glanced over at my dog, and she was awake too with her head up. Also strange. I put on my little puppy voice and ask my dog if she needs to pee, but she just stares back at me, then looks to the closet. I look to the closet too, and see that it's open even though I remember shutting it before going to bed. I quickly turn the lamp on and get out of bed to close the door. I don't even bother looking inside. My teenage brain still thinks a ghost is more likely than an intruder. So I get back into bed, scroll on my phone a bit, until I fall back to sleep. I wake up the next morning as usual to feed my dog, but when I go out into the hall, I see my bedroom door is open. I always close my door when I'm not in there. Now, it was still dark out because I have to feed my dog around 6 a.m. or she throws a fit. I look inside my room, turn on the light, and the doll is on the floor. I left it on my bed. I remembered last night and am now feeling paranoid, but again, I just put the doll back on my bed and leave, deciding just to have my door open. After feeding my dog, I went back to bed to sleep a couple extra hours. That's when the most frightening thing happened. I was woken up by a loud banging sound. Loud enough to wake me up, the heaviest sleeper in my family. I quickly got up and ran downstairs, my first thought being maybe my Nana had fallen in the basement and was banging for me to help her, but when I got downstairs I realized that the banging was coming from my balcony door. I saw the glass shaking, as if something was hitting it from outside. The banging was so loud that it was shaking the counters. The strangest part is that my dog was just standing in front of the door staring at it, and she's the type of dog who will start barking if a mouse farts. I'm really shaken up at this point. It's completely still outside, no wind at all. I text my parents and tell them what's going on. As soon as I do, the banging stops. They tell me it's probably nothing to worry about. I went downstairs to see my Nana, but she had no idea what happened. She's also completely deaf, so of course she couldn't hear it. She can't even walk up the stairs, so there's no way she caused any of it. That was the last weird incident that happened. The next week, my parents got back. I didn't tell them everything that happened because I didn't want them to think I'm a chicken or something. Needless to say, I moved the doll out of my room until my dad brought it back to his golf team. Nothing else strange occurred. I still have no idea what went on during those couple of days. I sort of wonder about the story behind that doll now, but I don't really know if I want to ask my dad. I'm 23 years old and starting to remember this shadowy figure that would appear then disappear in my old family's house. One second there would be nothing, then the next instant he would be right beside you. He didn't have a set place in the house. He would always move and walk around the house, and you'd know it was him because you would get this feeling that you weren't alone. He'd be walking beside you or on top of the staircase, just watching. I have to add that he never felt evil. He was definitely not an angry spirit, more like a watcher. I also want to add that I describe him like a man because I remember him being very tall and his silhouette was a masculine shape. Other than that, you couldn't make out his face or anything else. He seemed like he may have been cloaked or hooded sometimes, though. He never did much, just came and left. Everyone, except my younger sister because she was too young, knew about the Shadow Man, but once he appeared to someone who was alone. I should mention that before I was born in 1997, that my great-grandmother on my dad's side had died of old age in the house. She had passed away in the back bedroom, which became me and my brother's room when my younger sister was born. My dad was with her on that night, and says that she saw something. He walked out of the room and came back, and she was dead. Anyways, my parents got married and we moved in 2012, and I haven't seen the Shadow Man since. Whenever I think about it though, or hear similar stuff, all the hair on my body stands up, and my right eye drops a single tear, every time, without fail. It's even happening as I type. I try to control it, but I can't. I've had other supernatural encounters, and this always happens. I live in South Africa with my family, and we recently moved into a 2-story house. My room is upstairs. Simple room, really, bed facing the sliding door. Just outside the sliding door, I have a small area where I can smoke. To my left, we have a view of our indoor pool, with an almost UV light type of effect. Now, to my problem. It's been 2 weeks in this new place, and something is following me. I know I sound crazy, but it breathes very, very hard. Last night I went to bed at around 11 p.m. after watching some memes on YouTube. I woke up with a rather foul smell. I honestly assumed I had farted in my sleep. But as soon as I stood up to open the sliding door, I felt it. I swear I am not crazy. I felt something breathing down my neck, and the smell got worse. While going through a tough time in my relationship, I decided to move in with my mom for a few months for a break from the chaos. A guy I had met through a mutual friend of ours offered to pick me up in his truck and take us for a drive through the mountain trails behind my mother's house. Bored out of my mind with TV and food, I agreed. He arrived, I got in. We drove to the top of the ridge at the beginning of one of the trails where we stopped to roll up really quick. 5 or 10 minutes later, we were slowly driving along, listening to music, talking, laughing, realizing that we had actually been neighbors years before. The song on the truck radio was changing, and there began a softer song. We could hear the wind blowing quietly through the trees, and all of a sudden there was a whisper. "She's with him," the voice said, extremely clearly. I did not know what to do. I mean, what were they talking about? And even more importantly, who were they? We continued to drive down a trail a bit longer because my guy friend said it would be bad not to show dominance to whatever it was and not to run scared, ever. But it was, in fact, the scariest moment of my life. I should clarify also that this is in the middle of nowhere in the middle of nowhere. My mom has no neighbors for miles. Hunters are allowed on the property, but none were in the area. We shined headlights in the direction of the whisper, and there was nothing. My brother and I were staying out at night at our grandparents' house, and now for context, her house is in the middle of the ghetto in Golf Manor. Anyway, me and my brother were watching TV and my grandma was at the store, and then suddenly my brother says, "Want to go into the basement?" Not trying to sound like a wuss, I agreed. This was the worst decision of the month. We go into the basement, and it is creepy as hell, and when we reach the bottom of the staircase, the door shuts behind us. Now, I just shake it off as natural, but still, I feel uneasy. We go into the garage because her garage is in the basement, so we start going through. We find a rusty pipe and a motorcycle handlebar and some faint writing on the wall. We obviously find other things like a lawnmower and lawn stuff too. But then, we heard a loud bang, like the sound of a metal door slamming. It was the laundry room door. We almost crapped our pants, and we ran back upstairs, scared as hell. Later that night, we started to fall asleep. Grandma was already asleep. We heard what sounded like all the basement doors opening and slamming shut. Grandma, like I said, was not awake. We ended up finally falling asleep and told her about what happened the next morning. She just laughed and said, "That's just Jim messing with you." And then she explained that Jim was the old house owner who had died there. That didn't really help us much, but it did ease our minds. This is my one and only paranormal or unexplained experience. I was never exactly a believer, but I'd never completely disregarded the existence of the otherworldly. It happened a few years ago, sometime in the winter of 2016. I randomly woke up in the middle of the night, and the first thing that I noticed was how dark that my room was. It was supposed to be dark, because I had all my lights off and the windows closed, but you know, a little bit of tiny light from the outside street light always finds a way to enter from the edges of closed windows, like you can barely distinguish the pitch black from a slight aura, right? But there was none of it. It was pitch black all around. I thought it was probably a power outage, and I started to think random stuff like, probably this is what blind people see all their life. Must be sad. And slowly drifting back into sleep, when I was suddenly reawoken by the feeling of my bed shaking. I thought I had fallen asleep, and this is one of those sleep jerks that happen when you fall into your dream. But then more stuff started to happen. Soon after the first shake, there was a second one, which I felt much more clearly. A big rat had been invading our kitchen for a while, and I thought maybe it had somehow snuck into my room. But how could a rat shake my bed? Then, a few seconds later, I felt a literal punch under my bed, as if someone had punched the underside of my mattress right beneath where I was laying. I felt the mattress bump up in the center of my back. Oddly enough, instead of freaking out, I became extremely calm. And oddly enough again, I started to think of a logical reason. My mom made me check under my bed before sleeping, as she thought that some thief might have snuck into our home. She overthinks a lot. I thought that maybe someone actually had snuck in this time, but why would he disturb me instead of... And I felt another 2 consecutive punches from under me, right as I was having that thought. I froze for a solid minute, finally realizing that things might be abnormal here. Maybe I'm bragging, but after freezing initially, I went weirdly calm again, almost as if my brain went, "Oh no, it's a ghost." Anyway, there was a final punch, followed again by the bed shaking. I remember as the bed was shaking, I got up almost subconsciously, walked straight to the light switch on the other side of the room, and turned the lights on. There was nothing out of the ordinary. I looked under my bed with a flashlight. Also nothing. I should have freaked out here, but I didn't, which is really odd for someone like me who gets nervous and shaky for even the simplest social situations. My body worked almost on its own. I turned the lights off, took the flashlight with me to bed, and fell asleep as soon as I hit the mattress. And then it was morning. Nothing ever happened after that. This is a short story. I was maybe 4 or 5 at the time. It was November or October. I'm assuming it was October because that day my dad and I had bought pumpkins for us to carve for the first time, according to my memory. Before we began carving, my uncle and I were in the backyard. My sister and one of my cousins were playing in a pile of leaves beside me next to a tall green pine tree, and my uncle went inside to grab a frisbee for us to catch, and a camera to take a picture of us playing in the leaves. I remember when my uncle went inside, I turned around to look at the beautiful trees. There was another apartment complex behind our own. I remember the sun had started to set, and the golden rays had coated the green, freshly cut grass on the ground. I also noticed a young woman in a white gown in the yard across from me. She was bent over, and she was putting a flower into the jacket pocket on a little boy who was holding a white pillow. My uncle came outside, and I asked him, "What is that lady doing?" He smiled and said no one was there. He called over my sister and my cousin and snapped a pic of us. I instantly forgot about the lady in the white dress. Years had passed, and I had grown into a young woman. I had moved in with my boyfriend, and as time passed, it came time for us to move out of our apartment. As I was packing, I noticed a box that my dad had given to me when I met my boyfriend. I didn't open it until that time. It was pictures of my family, old clothes I used to wear when I was a little girl. I opened a photo album and looked through it. Then I looked more in the box, and I found a photo, the one my uncle took of me that day when I was a little girl. In the background, within the golden setting sunlight, I saw a woman in a bride's dress. I saw her features and her outline in the sunlight, but only in the sunlight. She looked happy, and she was bent down with both of her hands together holding something. The rest of her body didn't show up. I took the photo with me and visited my uncle, and as we sat down I pulled out the photo and looked at it for a second. I wondered if he would even remember. I then mustered the courage to ask him if he recalled that day. He faintly did, and I showed him the photo, and he smiled, remembering the days when we were all just little innocent kids. I pointed at the sunlight and asked, "Do you see it too?" He looked closer and said, "The woman?" I said, "Yeah. Do you remember when I was a kid and I asked you about the woman in the white dress, and you said that no one was there?" He replied, "Oh yeah, I see it. It must be a ghost." Anyway, that was my little short story. When I was a little kid, I was pretty much fearless. I was out catching snakes barehanded before I was even in first grade. I got in lots of fights because I never backed down from older bullies. I once climbed up the outside of a 5-story building when I was in second grade just because I looked at the blocks in the corner and thought, I could probably do that. When I was in 4th grade, I lived in a small little one-horse town in Ohio, population 1,500. It was the kind of small town where everyone knows everyone else, and knows everyone else's business. When I was in the 4th grade, my older sister, by 2.5 years, and I went out trick-or-treating. This is back in the days when you could go out trick-or-treating so long that you would have to come back home and dump your bag out at some point before going back out. Everything was going completely normal, and we were having a great time in spite of the fact that she and I don't really get along that well. We came up to a house and knocked on the door. A woman answered. Before we could even say trick or treat, I was hit with such a wave of absolute terror that I immediately turned and ran away as fast as I could. When I got about a block away, my fear had subsided and I realized that I had left my sister behind. When I turned around, she was running toward me, about 30 paces behind. I was embarrassed to admit that I had been scared to death, and simply tried to pretend like I had run away because she did and passed her because I was much faster. I asked her, "Why did you run away?" She didn't seem to realize that I had run away before her, and looked bewildered and simply said, "I don't know, I was scared for my life." Having her admit her fear allowed me to admit mine as well. I had been in many near-death situations and more than once thought that I was going to die. but I have never in my life felt such absolute, complete terror. Neither of us had any explanation for it. This wasn't some haunted house on the edge of town. It was just a normal house on a normal street. The woman who had answered the door did not say or do anything that could have frightened us. She didn't look scary or threatening in any way. She looked just like any other average housewife that would have been in someone's living room in the town at that time. To my recollection, she did not say or do anything at all. She simply opened the door, and the minute we saw her, we were both filled with complete and utter terror. Again, I have no explanation for this, nor does my sister. I was about 17 when this happened. I moved in with my father after living with my mom for most of my life. Behind his house is a trail in between our house and the neighbor's house. It's pretty unbeaten, but you can still find your way through it. At the end of the trail, there's a very small pond. The first time I walked back there, I found it very charming, until I turned my head to see a small porcelain sculpture of a boy sitting on a log. The paint had faded from years of sitting there. The shirt was still slightly colored, but the thing about the paint that bothered me most was his eyes. They looked so blank. But the most important detail to the story is the hands, or the lack thereof. His hands were nowhere to be seen. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a forgotten decoration put there by the neighbor long before I had arrived. The pond behind my house afterwards is where I would go and smoke weed while my dad was home. The sculpture never bothered me too much. That is, until the day that I touched it whilst I was walking around. I walked to the very back of the pond and further into the woods and found a small, wooden, decrepit shack. I wasn't about to waltz in there and get shanked by a weirdo, so I left it as is. But I got a really sinister feeling from it when I turned my back to it. When I was making the return trip, I had to slightly lean on the sculpture as to not fall into the pond. When I say I've never felt something so sickening and evil, I mean it. I immediately let go and sat back in the small chair that I had set up and began to smoke, thinking I'm just being paranoid. Then, as I finished my bowl, I feel something tug my hoodie slightly, so I jerked my head to see. Nothing there, and I just brushed it off as a branch or something, so I took a deep breath, leaned back in my chair, and looked up at the stars, leaving my arm dangling down off of the chair. Then I felt a small, cold hand wrap its fingers around my index finger. I nearly shit myself, jumped up, and sprinted back to my house, leaving all my paraphernalia at the pond. Keep in mind, it's about 9 or 10-ish, so I'm tripping over branches and vines until I found myself back on my back porch. From there, I could hear several twigs snapping and footsteps crunching pine straw heading back toward the pond. I haven't been back since, and I'm not planning on going. Between that old shed and the small, handless sculpture, the whole area gives off bad energy that thankfully I don't think I've brought into my house. A number of years ago, my mother and I were visiting my aunt in Idaho, staying in her odd house. She had always told us it was haunted, but I never really believed her because to her, everything was haunted. Well, one night during our stay, my mom woke up hearing a baby cry. My cousin Julie, her husband Matt, 10-year-old son Joe, and her daughter Cindy, who was just a few months old, were living with her at the time. My mom assumed that it was their infant daughter and asked my cousin about the crying in the middle of the night, saying something like, "I don't assume you got much sleep." Julie responded by telling her that the noise that she had heard had not been Cindy. But I had heard it right outside my door as well. She then said it must have been her son playing some sort of prank, to which Joe quickly rebutted her by saying that it was not him. Joe also said that he wasn't going back to that part of the house at night. We believed Joe, as his mother and my cousin had experienced things back there several times. He's now an adult and married, and still maintains his innocence, as well as refusing to ever stay in that house alone. Fast forward to last summer. I took a few days vacation and flew up to join my mom and see the family. One night, my aunt, mom, myself, and Joe's wife were sitting at the bar that separates her kitchen from the living room. All of a sudden, in the back of the house, we heard the sound of a door closing. I looked up to see if anyone else had heard it. They had. We got up to investigate the sound, thinking that someone else was in the house. There was not a soul to be found. Then we began to investigate what could have caused it. It sounded like a heavy metal door. We came to the conclusion that it could have been someone hit the loose bathroom door handle. The bathroom was in my line of sight, with no one else in the house at the time. The place just feels weird. It always has. There are many more stories in that house that I've heard about, but I know that I won't do them justice. I'm living in an older century 3-story house in a small town in Ontario. I was laying on the first set of stairs beside the front door next to my dog, I think taking his leash off for a walk. He's a big boxer shepherd full of love. Anyways, I hear this very loud and unusual sound, like something has come loose or broken. I'm home alone. I actually thought maybe it had come from the basement because I was so close by there. But then I realized that it was not, because the sound had gotten further away. I went up to the 3rd floor, which is actually like a split level with 2 empty rooms. Both remain empty since we've lived here, my wife and I. I go upstairs, not sure what I was expecting, but generally am a very logical human being. We have old bedroom doors with skeleton key handles, and when I get upstairs, I see that one handle is literally shaking up and down, almost vibrating. It didn't just go on for a couple of seconds. Remember, it carried on from when I went to check the basement and went upstairs, and now, as I was staring at it, it continued to vibrate. I grabbed the handle to make it stop, which it did completely. I opened the door to see nothing there and nothing in the room across either. We keep both doors closed, and the windows closed, and also the vents closed because we don't want heat or cool coming up to a floor that we don't even use. To this day, I have not figured out what caused this, and it hasn't happened since. Note, I don't remember any behavior from my dog. He may have been a bit timid, but he gets like this whenever my mood shifts to anxiety. There's one other experience that I had in our home. Our dining room is attached to the garage, and it is not a proper exterior door. It's another old, beautiful wooden door with a skeleton key and all. One day as I was cleaning, I shut the door just enough so that it was closed but not fully sealed, which I do this all the time. I went to my bedroom and heard the door to the garage swing open. Again, no other surrounding windows were open that could have made the air shift. Nothing was different than any other day when I do this. One other side note, my dog is terrified of our rocking chair. It's an old one that I had spray painted black. Never thought anything of it because honestly this dog is kind of scared of everything. He doesn't like certain flooring, which I'm assuming is because he must have had a bad fall at our old house or something, because even if I put a big piece of meat treat for him across a tile floor, he won't enter. And yes, we trim his claws, so I'm thinking it's a bit of trauma or a phobia. He's a big baby, so it's probably nothing but just another weird thing to the house. Any ideas on the shaking handle, though? It was aggressive, and even if something was in an empty room, something, say, fell on it, causing it to shake, why wouldn't it stop? So this happened a few months back when I happened to be in the bathroom. I was singing that Willow Smith "Wait a Minute" song to myself, minding my business, you know. I got to the point in the song where she quotes a phrase said in the Avatar movie in their language. And while I'm singing it, I'm thinking to myself at the same time, I wonder what that actually means translated into English. And as I finished singing the line, simultaneously trying to recall what it translated to, a female, disembodied voice said, "No, you can't." I shut up immediately and paused for a second, shocked. It sounded as if someone were speaking into a tin can, but very clear and only a few feet away. I left the bathroom completely weirded out, and after a few minutes I remembered about wanting to know what the phrase meant. I googled it and found out that it meant "I see you" in English. I was, and am, still blown away by this strange experience. My grandparents' house is haunted. Strange things happen all the time. We've gotten used to it over the years. I've seen people walking along the hallway. My mom has seen legs walk up the stairs. And my grandparents have both heard what they thought was me shout from the back of the house telling them that I was home, when I was 7 hours away in my own home. That's just a few of the things that have gone on. It's quite an active house to live in. My sister is only 13, and was doing what most kids her age do. She was dancing around the kitchen yesterday evening, making TikTok videos. The kitchen is down at the back of the house, and has a door with a window, which leads to the utility room. At night, the back room obviously gets dark, and the only light would have been from the kitchen. She said that she was twirling around when she saw a hand on the utility room side of the window, looking as if it were about to knock on the glass. This clearly scared her enough to ask Mom to investigate, but she found nothing that would have caused my sister to see what she had. Everyone else had been in the front end of the house watching TV, so we knew that it wasn't a family member playing a joke on her. It had happened to me years before, except it was a full person who had stood behind the door, and it happened in daylight. One final event to add more interest to the story: her school bag was on the kitchen counter last night when everyone went to sleep. This morning, we found it in the middle of the floor with all of her books stacked neatly right beside it. Back in the early 80s, my then boyfriend moved into an apartment in Brockport, New York to be closer to his college. It was a nice 2-bedroom. The building was about 5 years old. It overlooked the parking lot of some plazas, with a burger monarch that he worked part-time at. Every night, from the time we moved in until I moved out, I had one of 3 creepy dreams. One involved being back at my parents' house, where the stairs up to the attic are in my closet, and either an infestation of snakes or something oozy and rotting was sort of slurping its way to the stairs to make its way down. The second dream was of being lost and unable to find the apartment building. The big kicker dream involved it being moving day, and as I walked around trying to decide where to hang the spice shelf, I noticed black and red writing and smears on the walls. I remember thinking to myself in the dream that they should have been painted over. The night before I moved out, the dream continued with me being in my bedroom, and there was a guy in a hooded robe standing and leaning against the doorframe watching me. I woke up when Keith got home from his work shift, and he asked me why I didn't wave back. See, he had one of those great hooded velour bathrobes, and he had waved at a hooded figure in our bedroom window, thinking that I had gotten up to watch for him coming home. I wasn't standing there, and wasn't even awake. When we were moving out, him back to the dorm and me to a different branch of my company, we found a little medallion with some of the glyphs that I had seen on the wall in my dreams. Luckily, who or whatever it was didn't follow me, and a friend warded the heck out of my new bedroom. I grew up in a historical town in the UK where there is a cathedral that's over 700 years old. For hundreds of years, people across England and beyond would pilgrimage to it. My family bought a house in this town and decided to renovate it. From the start, I had edgy feelings about the place, but being a generally nervous teen at the time, I put it down to me just being silly. My dad is a total no bullshit kind of guy. Calls a spade, has no time for the paranormal, spiritual, or religious chat. He thinks in terms of logic and realism and trusts what he can see and touch. My mom and him have had some heated debates about the fact that she has seen or felt unexplained things, and he scoffs at that. Basically, if anything spooky ever happened to him, I would believe it purely because he doesn't. I found this out years later. One night, Dad was woken up by the sound of hooves galloping. We slept on the ground floor, but nowhere near cattle or horses, so the unusual noise woke him up. He got up and left the bedroom to look for the source of the sound. He took one step toward the lounge door in front of him and opened it. The lounge door had windows that opened out onto the main road. Through the window, all he could see were rows and rows of heads walking past the house. The heads had gold helmets with red plumage on them, and they all moved toward the center of town, toward the cathedral. They didn't pay attention to him, but just moved silently through, just their heads facing toward town. We knew the road that we lived on was built on a Roman road, and he believed that these were Roman soldiers on horseback making their way to the city. Over the years, the land would have been built on and up an accumulated height. So in this day and age, all that you could see of them was their neck and head. As an 8-year-old child, I was given a porcelain doll by a very dear family friend, Miss Marion. She was all the time coming across things and giving them to me. This doll was the last thing she gave me. I was never really into dolls at all growing up, but I took the doll and placed her in my room in a small, child-sized rocking chair. The chair sat right next to my closet and dresser beside my nightlight. The doll was very pretty. She was dressed in a peach and cream colored dress with an apron and petticoats. She had little black Mary Jane shoes that, when removed, showed her delicately painted toenails. Her body was soft, only her head, forearms, and legs from the knee down were porcelain. Her lips were pink, and her dark brown hair hung in slightly frizzed and now loose curls. Her eyes were brown, her cheeks a rosy peach color, all like mine. Miss Marion had a point of saying that the doll reminded her of me, which is why she gave her to me. From the moment that doll came into my house, things began to happen. I was always uneasy with Claire. I never wanted to touch her, and when I played in my room, it felt as if she were watching me. It wasn't anything to panic about, but I do remember feeling like if I did something wrong, she might actually tell on me. How ridiculous does that sound? The first real occurrence I remember was when I was reading in my room. Ghost stories, if you can believe that. When a musical carousel horse that sat on my dresser began to play. Not just a couple of notes, like old mechanical music boxes will do at times, but like someone just wound it up fully. I sat stunned and stared at the little horse as it moved up and down in time with the music, and then it just stopped. Not wound down. just suddenly stopped. I was a pretty brave kid. I didn't run, and I didn't tell my mom. I just let it go. The next thing that happened was the voice. For several nights, and on into these years, I was woken up by what sounded like a woman inches from my face shouting my name. I would jump and sit up and find my room empty. Those happenings died down after a few months. She then started to plague my little brother with the same thing, and now that he and I are grown and gone, she's moved on to my dad. The little things started to get to me. I'd put something in a certain place only to find it later on the floor or on my dresser, right next to Claire. All my missing items eventually turned up around her. Once a ring ended up in the pocket of her apron. Books would fall off of my shelves, and a perfume smell would sometimes fill my room. The doll itself didn't smell at all, but the air around her would. My catalyst to finally get Claire out of my room was the night I woke up after hearing thumping around near my closet. I opened my eyes, sat up in bed, and of course my eyes were drawn to the nightlight where Claire sat. As I watched, the source of the thumping became clear. The rocking chair Claire occupied was rocking on its own. I had thick shag carpet, so there's no way it was rocking just by chance. If that wasn't enough, Claire's feet, which were both turned to the side facing opposite each other, slowly straightened themselves to be both pointing directly up. This part still freaks me out 20 years later. She then turned her head, which was quite impossible to do since it was fixed to her cloth body. She looked toward me, and every music box in my room, 4 of them, started to play at once. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't feel endangered so much as I just felt scared of what was happening. I screamed for my mom and dad. The music stopped, but Claire maintained her gaze in my direction. And this is why I hate dolls. Even after that, I couldn't get rid of Claire totally. I ended up stuffing her in a box in the back of a storage closet. She's still there as far as I know. So is the woman who now screams my dad's name in the middle of the night, and not in the kinky way. While I think she explains some of the oddities that happened in my parents' house, I don't think she's the tie to it all. My university was in a remote location surrounded by a river. It was almost like an island. Very isolated, and during the weekend all the locals would go home, making it more eerie. This happened in 2014 when I was 22 years old. My roommate had gone home for the weekend, so I decided to sleep in my friend's room. Around 1 a.m. I woke up feeling thirsty. My friend was studying, so I decided to walk to my room and bring the water bottle as my room was on the other side of the corridor. There was an elevator at the end of the corridor, which played soft music, and you would know if the elevator was on your floor. So I walked toward my room, and as I turned right toward the corridor, I saw an unknown girl staring at the elevator without moving. First of all, I didn't know who she was, because we can usually tell which year a student is, especially after spending 3 to 4 years in the same place and looking at the same faces every day. Secondly, the girl was wearing denim jeans, sports shoes, and was carrying a backpack as if she had just come back from her class. What's strange about that is that the hostel door closes at 8 p.m. The girl was looking straight at the elevator buttons without even blinking. The elevator was still on our floor, so why wasn't she getting on? I could see the side of her face. It was a very strange stare. I don't know how to explain it. I automatically stopped walking after seeing her and got goosebumps all over my body. Something was stopping me from taking my steps forward. I stood there and watched her for about a minute. After that, I went running to my friend's room and asked her if she recognized the lady. When she came back, she wasn't there, and the elevator music was still playing. My friend didn't believe me, and I still don't know who or what that was. So it was around May of this year when I was playing hide and seek with my family. When the game started, I went to the basement. But after a couple minutes, I was about to be spotted, so I moved to the bathroom, but went backwards into the bathroom. Keep in mind, I was facing the doorway, and that is when it started. When I heard the groans, I froze. They didn't sound human, so I knew it wasn't one of my family members. A couple of minutes went by, and I could still hear the groans, but built up the courage to run out of the bathroom. A couple of more minutes went by. I could still hear the groans, and I had to build up the courage to run from the bathroom. That's all I have to share. If you could explain what happened, then that would be great. My great-grandmother died in that house. It was built in the 1940s, and that basement bathroom was built very poorly. I am a serious skeptic with decades of debunking behind me, but I have a few cases that cannot be covered by SP, sleep disorders, infrasound, carbon monoxide, etc. One personal account occurred a few years ago after my paternal grandfather died, though this was before I dealt with his estate. I was spending a week repairing the old maternal family Bible, a damp, damaged 17th century Welsh edition, so a tough bit of work, and I went to the living room for a break. On the exact spot I was born, old family, old house, was a fixed pillar of smoke. I was a pipe smoker at the time, so recognized it by color and character, and opened all the windows to clear this mysterious miasma. It didn't move at all, and had a distinct Tonkin bean scent. I couldn't name it at the time. The exact same one that filled the hospital room during final prayers for my paternal grandfather. I'm an ex-Methodist preacher, so that fell to me. The pillar was seen and photographed by 2 others. 3 weeks later, I handled the estate, opened a sealed room, and found a Tonkin-based pipe tobacco tin. I spent 12 years ruling out any way that I could have known that scent, and there was no other way or means that I could know it other than spirits held me at that moment that a life ended and supported me to catalog family history. Simple and odd, but interesting. Last night, my boyfriend went into the room next to our bedroom to play video games while I watched Parks and Rec on my phone on low volume in bed. After an hour or so, he ran in and asked, "Is everything okay?" I stared blankly at him. "Yeah? Why?" He then said he'd heard someone wailing, loudly, and that it sounded like my voice. It couldn't have been Parks and Rec, because I wasn't watching an episode with any sound in it like that, not to mention that the volume was too low to be heard in the other room. It couldn't have been me because I was just chilling. Additionally, I had not heard any wailing sound at all. He said he'd heard it through his gaming headphones a couple of times, wasn't quite sure what it was, took them off, heard it a third time clearly, and then came to check on me. This is strange because a few nights before, I was feeling incredibly ill with severe chills to the point where I couldn't leave the blankets to get more blankets. I was calling for help, and he heard nothing through his headphones. They're pretty good at canceling outside noise, plus he plays the game music at high volume. So who was the wailing woman? This happened to me 2 years in a row when I was young. Too young to face as much horror as I did. I was 6, and it was Halloween. I was just getting into bed when I heard an awful screeching sound coming from the hall closet. It was right by my mom and dad's bedroom, but they didn't hear a thing, which really freaked me out. I slowly got up out of bed and ran silently to the closet. I opened the door, and it took all my effort not to scream. I saw a yellow metal box. I opened it and saw the creepiest doll. It was a raggedy, ugly, old doll. Its hair was in 2 long, blonde braids. Her, I should say. I slowly picked the doll up. It screamed again, and this time I did too. From that night on, the thought of it lurked in my mind until the next Halloween, when I had another encounter with it. When everything happened again that year, I made up my mind and threw it away. The next day, I had gone into the closet to get my hula hoop, and my eye caught the yellow box. I picked it up. I opened it, and an uncomfortable chill ran down my back. The doll had returned. I couldn't get rid of her. Ever. To this day, I still know its exact location. My friend Ava hasn't lived with her mom in over 2 years since she moved in with her boyfriend. But recently, I went back to her mom's house with her to grab some plants that she had propagated and have lunch. It was a normal day, and I had been in the house many times before, so it wasn't any different. The visit was short, but when they went upstairs to discuss what they should do with her old room, I was left to my own devices on the first floor. The basement didn't have a door to the downstairs, and the dining room was adjacent to it. So naturally, I decided to look down the stairs since it always gave me a spook. I'm not really a huge fan of the paranormal, and I never really had a cut and dry experience. I also never quote-unquote pick up on vibes either, but I hated the vibe of her mom's place, especially the basement. When I went to the stairs, I looked down them and saw a weird, humanoid figure in the darkness staring back at me. My entire body felt fuzzy, and I couldn't move until I heard Ava and her mom coming back down the stairs, and I hightailed it away from there. Not really sure what it was, but Ava has always said that the house was haunted, and that she avoids the basement like the plague. So last year, I received a doll from my aunt. It was a hand-me-down that she found in storage, so I don't know its origin story. Her name is Alice. First weird note is that I immediately knew her name as soon as I held her for the first time. Anyways, originally Alice sat in my room, but one day while cleaning, I put her in my closet. After putting her in my closet, weird stuff started happening. I would hear her in there, usually her knocking against the walls. It was so loud that my friend could usually hear it over the phone. I would get reoccurring dreams of someone named the Medicine Girl. I would often awake from these dreams in sleep paralysis. Other objects and items would go missing randomly, only to be found in places where I had not left them. My grandmother's stuffed bear, that's at least 50 years old, would move across the room and end up in places that I also hadn't left it in. I practiced witchcraft, and the plants on my altar died. All of this stopped when I moved her out of the closet and back into my room. Due to all of this, I believe that she is haunted. However, I can't find anything online about what you're supposed to do with a haunted doll, and I'd like some advice. I believe she's scared of being alone, or doesn't like being hidden, hence everything stopped when I removed her from the closet. I used to work in a hotel as a security guard. It was built in 1922 and had a basement. One night, the front desk clerk, the valet, and I are just hanging out in the lobby just chatting when a phone rings. The phone call was coming from the basement where there are offices. At the time, there was supposed to be no one in there. I had already locked the doors and made sure that the basement was empty. The clerk picked up the phone, heard a weird noise, and then got disconnected. It chilled me to the bones. The valet guy and I went down to make sure that it was, in fact, empty and that no one had been trespassing. The doors were still locked, and I didn't see anyone coming out, so we went inside the office. The only thing that we found was the phone blinking, and it looked like someone had picked it up and dropped it. The valet and I looked at each other, and there was cold sweat on our faces. That is one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me when working as graveyard security. My dad and I decided to go to this store one day to buy incense, and we meet this woman that I think owns the shop, and she's weirdly interested in the color of my eyes. My eyes are a weird color, they're yellow and green, but she was telling me that they're so bright that they're deceiving. Well, fast forward to a few weeks later, and I'm in my room asleep. My mom is awake, and when I woke up, she told me that she saw a woman, perfectly described her as the woman from that shop, astral projecting into our house, and went in my room and tried to take me. My mom had never went to that store, had never seen that woman, so that's how I know she wasn't lying. My mom and dad weren't on talking terms at that time. But ever since then, I get really weird nightmares involving her in them, and they occur every night, and I can't get them to stop. They always involve her taking me.